Hello and welcome back, and today I'm hoping I can help you answer the simple question, should you buy this or this? That's right, QNAP have now refreshed their range of SMB and prosumer solutions. The previous darling of that range, their kind of flagship feature product, the 53D series, has now slowly but surely started to give way to this, the TS-464 series. However, both of them are available in the wild. It has to be said that right now, no matter what e-tailer you're looking at, your standard Amazons and the like, or some of your more specialist retailers out there worldwide, chances are the 64 series that has been released now in the first quarter to the first half, depending on where you are, of 2022, this system is available and, I would argue, the more expensive choice of the two. Also, it has arrived with lesser stock being available globally, it has to be said, but it's a brand new release and that's the way these things tend to go. But at the same time, you've got this, the 53D series, released in spring-summer of 2020, a couple of years ago, and now this system is a great deal more available, and now that price tag is also a little bit more affordable. In some places, listing price differences between these two units of around £50 to £100. Now, first disclaimer straight off the bat. I am well aware that these are not strictly the same profile system. This is the TS-464 and this is the TS-464 and this is the TS-653D. This is the 6-bay model. However, because I didn't have the 4-bay D series in the studio, I've got this here on the table, but take it as read in this video that this pretty much everything we're going to cover applies to the 2-bay, the 4-bay and the 6-bay. But for the purpose of clarity on this video, I'm going to refer to them both as their respective 4-bay systems. So just know whether you're looking at the 253 or 253D or 264, or you're looking at the 464 and the 453D, or whatever that combination, pretty much everything I'm going to talk about now applies. But let's really drill down into that price difference there, shall we? 50 to 100 nicker. Now that's not a small sum of money. You can lump on a couple of terabytes here or there if you shop around smartly enough. So the first thing we really have to combat in this video is the new series device worth that extra money? And I would say mostly, pretty much, because it has to also be, when we're comparing these two boxes against one another, it also has to be factored in that when the D series was first launched in 2, 4 and 6-bay devices, it was more expensive. It's just the way these things run. When these devices are first released, they tend to be very, very close to, or if not bang on, the recommended retail price, that RRP number. And this device's price coming down is just because it's been around in the industry so long. It's been around for over 2 years in terms of availability in the 2 and the 4 and the 6. And because a new series has come along, that's the other reason for that price difference. So although I will, of course, say that the newer generation box is largely better in every way in terms of internal and external hardware for the most part, it's going to be very hard to say that that justifies the price difference. In terms of software, they both run exactly the same version of the software, the QNAP QTS platform there with the regular updates, apps being added on there, client stuff, tools, all that sort of stuff. The only difference really between them when it comes to the software is this device can get more done on max volume. And by that I mean is a single user interacting with these two devices isn't really going to feel any difference in terms of what the software is capable of in most cases. But the minute you start increasing the number of users and the number of active processes on the system simultaneously, from individual cameras to individual file searches to individual shares, snapshots and more, you find that the newer generation system, thanks to its more modern, refreshed architecture, will be able to just get more done. And in like-for-like tasks, whatever they are, you will find that the D-series box will use more CPU utilization in any given task than that of the 64 inside. So in terms of software, there's very little difference unless you are going to push these boxes. But I think let's be realistic, let's drill into that hardware difference between them, because the newer generation box, we kind of accept that a new release is going to have better hardware, and in most cases that is true here. Let's actually look at the measurement difference between them there. So the CPUs inside these devices are both Celeron based. Intel Celeron x86 64-bit processors there. This family of NASes is pretty much, with a few tiny exceptions, always featured a Celeron based processor there. And the reason for that is it's the most cost effective. It finds a fine line between being 24/7 utilization with efficiency and not requiring an onboard in-system fan, while at the same time allowing a price point that allows users to get a good feel of all the features available from the brand, including a lot of third-party stuff, without breaking the bank. That's how you tend to find these. They're otherwise known as SMB, small medium business, or prosumer, or professional consumer devices. Now, both of these CPUs have a clock speed of 2.0 GHz in the J4125 and the N5095 or N5105. We'll get to that in a moment, the CPU named convention. But between them, they both have a 2.0 GHz clock speed. However, this one bursts, that is to say, it can overclock itself up to 2.9 GHz, whereas the 6.4 can clock itself to 2.9 GHz on all four of those cores. Also, although both of them have got a hardware encryption engine, graphical manipulation and in onboard graphics are slightly better on the 6.4 series there. So if you're looking at things like multimedia, you're looking at things like Plex Media Server, you're looking at, handling files and data that has a graphical component or OpenGL, then chances are you're going to do better on the 64 series there. Not by a vast amount, but certainly in a marginally noticeable degree there to the average one-to-one access there. Now, the reason I mentioned two CPUs listed on this and only one on this series is because when this NAS came out, Intel had just refreshed their J4000 series with the latest revision, the J4125 quad-core. There was also a dual-core 4025. But in the 2 years since then, we've had hardware shortages across most areas of IT, but especially semiconductor shortages, changes at the manufacturer and consumer level due to the pandemic and the way people have changed the technology they need, and therefore they've had to retool. And of course, Intel themselves, who would normally refresh a CPU series every 2 to 3 years, basically having to have mixed stock everywhere and interrupting refreshes mid-range. The result is that the Celeron N5000 series being used in this new generation, it actually is 3 CPUs that are flying around from Intel that are near enough identical. They've got tiny differences, with the best one of the 3, and I really do mean by an incredibly marginal degree, the N5105 processor there. Now, that CPU is more than just clock speed. The difference between it's not just that the CPU gets up earlier in the morning that day and can stay up a bit later. It's more multifaceted than that. And the main big difference between these processors is something called PCI lanes and the chipset. Now, what that means is whenever you are bolting on different features onto a NAS, so you're adding more storage bays, you're adding more network bays, you're adding SSDs, you're adding USB, whatever you add on, those have to be handled by the CPU, and the CPU can only handle a certain numbers of features and functions in terms of hardware client connected devices at any given time. That's why you find when NASes are at a certain price point, they don't arrive with a huge amount of added on hardware. The CPUs can only handle a certain number of things at once. Okay, so in the case of the TS-253D, 253D, 453D and 653D, that CPU allowed the system to have a couple of SODIMM memory modules there, and the CPU supporting 8 gig of memory. It allowed it to have two 2.5 GB Ethernet ports there on the rear. Again, this is 2020, this was years ago. On top of that, there's USB 3.2 Gen 1, that's 5 gigabits per second USB, and unfortunately 3 USB 2 ports, because the PCI lanes were quite, being used up at this point. On top of that, it also had a PCIe upgrade slot. However, at least in the case of the 4 and the 6 bay, that PCI lane was Gen 2 times 2. The result was that PCIe upgrade slot, although there was advertisements for that slot being utilised by 10 gigabit Ethernet cards or even Ethernet combo cards that allows you to utilise network interface upgrades at 10 gigabit Ethernet and USB M2 NVMe SSDs, or just go straight ahead with 10 GB upgrades. Although you could put those on there, that PCIe bandwidth on the D series was 1,000 megabytes. PCIe Gen 2 times 2. Gen 2 is 500, and then times 2 equals 1,000. So you could add a 10 gigabit Ethernet card and get your 1,000 bandwidth there if you've got the right number of drives to saturate it. But the minute you started looking at M2 SSD cards, or you started looking at combo cards that had 10 GBE and M2 SSDs, the communication between the card and the system was reduced. And therefore you had that upgradability, but the PCI lanes in the chipset inherent to the core of the system didn't provide enough lanes and enough avenues for it to go to a larger capacity of that PCIe. If they did want to broaden the PCIe lane on the rear of this, they would have had to reduce a number of features about it. Maybe the storage bays, maybe removing 2.5 GBE, which was kind of critical to this system's popularity at the time because of its future-proof nature of that CPU. The system also arrived, as mentioned, with 4 gig of memory that could be upgraded to 8 gig of memory, the maximum supported by that CPU. Now, I've gone a long way round the houses here, but the reason I explained all that is because in the case of the TS-464 and indeed the 2 and the 6 bay versions of this, things are a great deal different. That CPU brings a lot more lanes to play with. Consequently, it has everything this device has, but so much more. So, for example, it's got its 4 bays there on the front, but the first thing you may notice is it has that USB port there on the front, and they both have a USB port there on the front and a one-touch copy button. But this is USB 3.2 Gen 2, and that means whereas this can provide you up to around 500 megabytes per second transmission, this can hit 1,000 over USB. Why is that important? If you're going to be backing up loads of files either from the NAS onto a USB or from a USB onto the NAS regularly, this can take time. Whether you do differential backups or not, the larger amount of new data, the longer it takes. Now, if you were looking at just bog standard hard drive in a case, if you're looking at just simple WD Passports or Seagate Backup Plus drives, these drives don't really put out more than about 180 megs anyway. So there's no point worrying about those, it wouldn't make a difference. But the cost of hard drives, and indeed SSDs more importantly, has gone down substantially, and therefore you can get drives like this. This is one of the SanDisk Extremes, and this has got an M2 SSD inside, and this can put out 1,000 megs easily. And if I use this SSD, or this external SSD, which again is constantly on sale, Black Friday, Prime Day, any kind of seasonal discount, you see lots of these now. You plug it in this, it will be half the speed of this. And for your backups, that could make all the difference, because time could literally mean money. Now, that USB doubling down compared with this device is just the start of it. Indeed, on the rear of the device, although it does feature USB 2s, which again, I'm not a big fan of, it does still have another USB 3.2 Gen 2 port right there. So again, lots of scalability and upgrades there. And indeed, remember that these systems also support that USB to 5 gigabit Ethernet adapter from QNAP that's come down in price a few times and allows you to add even more network connectivity on these devices. Now, talking of network connectivity, this system, much like its predecessor here, also has 2.5 gigabit Ethernet times 2. So things seem to be relatively even. What more can this device possibly bring to the party? Well, it's got two things. First and foremost, at the top here, you may have noticed I've already installed a PCIe card. This is an optional extra, but the PCIe slot on this device is PCIe Gen 3 times 2. Remember, this one was 2 times 2 and it gave you 1,000 megs. Gen 3 times 2 allows you to have 2,000 megabytes per second. You can install 2 port to 10GBE cards, or as I've done, you can install this combo card and allow yourself to have NVMe SSD drives and 10GBE on a single card with that 2000 megabytes per second PCIe slot there, giving you much better bandwidth and accessibility to the resources on that card, be they storage or increased network bandwidth, and the rest of the system. Yes, 2000 megabytes per second is still not it's still not fantastic, given that most SSDs these days, such as Seagate Iron Wolf and the WD Red SN700 series, can give you between 3 and 5,000 megs, and so technically they would still be bottlenecked, but they'll be significantly less bottlenecked in this system than they will on this system here. Another thing, because remember, so far we've had increased USB ports doubling down. We've seen double the PCIe bandwidth of that slot there, but on top of that, this system also supports up to 16 gig of DDR4 memory. Indeed, the 53D series arrives with 8 gig of 2400 MHz DDR4 memory from ADATA. The newer generation arrives with 4 gig of 2666 MHz ADATA inside there, but you can also upgrade it all the way up to 16 gig, twice that of the 53D in terms of its scalability there. So if you're looking at VMs, if you're looking at utilizing multiple IP cameras, if you're looking at running lots of different services, each of which is going to demand its little bit of memory, that will be an enormous advantage in terms of the newer generation system scalability. Another thing that this system has, and probably the last big difference between them in terms of hardware architecture at least, is the fact that the newer generation device also has M2 NVMe slots. You don't even need to use the card. If you use the card, you can just add more. This system, for example, the TS-464, has 4 hard drive bays and 2 M2 SSD bays, technically 6 bays of storage. And those M2 NVMe SSDs can be utilized for caching, so read and write caching to improve regularly accessed files or uploading generally to the system. You can use QTier, which allows you to create a single storage pool that's a combination of hard drives and SSD, and then it intelligently learns the most common access files and then moves them onto the SSDs, not like caching that copies them and creates dupes. Or you can just create a standalone SSD pool. So you could have your 4 hard drives there doing the work of archival storage and long, bulkier storage, cost-effective hard drives, and then have a couple of super fast SSDs there in order for your fast access storage, for your VMs, for the important data there. Now, again, those slots inside there, because this is still a Celeron, it can't go as far as like an Intel Core. Each of those SSD bays are PCIe Gen 3 times 1. So each SSD bay only gives you 1,000 megs and not the potential 3 to 4 to 5,000 that some of these SSDs can bring. But still, nonetheless, this is still a feature that is completely absent in the 53D. So when you really break it down, the newer generation device, let's say you're looking online and you see £100 price difference. Hopefully you won't, and as time wears on, the price will kind of reach a parity. But if there was £100 of price difference between these two boxes, if we were looking at the 2 4 bays, where is that £100 stack going? It goes towards a more powerful and efficient CPU. It goes towards the ability to have twice as much storage. It gives you the ability to have faster USB. It gives you the ability to add M2 NVMe SSDs, and it gives you the ability to add faster PCIe cards. I guess the point you must have got by now is this system is more future-proof. It is more scalable, and although by its very default base model isn't an enormous upgrade over the 53D, it's in its scalability to add up to 2 10GBE ports, the ability to add SSD M2 NVMEs, the ability to add faster USB, and just more ways in which it can be improved over time. Indeed, QNAP have a range of their own expansion series in the TL and the TR range. There are 2, 4, 6, 8 and 10 bay expansions. You can add them to both of these systems, but they'll be a lot more fast and a lot more robust on the 64 series, and that's what you're paying for. That word future-proof, or technically 2 words with a hyphen. And if you are looking at these two systems and you don't think you're going to be upgrading in all those different ways, if you don't think you're going to be running a multi-user, multi-client environment, the 53D can still tick all the boxes for you. It's still a very, very good NAS that's still able to provide pretty much everything that the QNAP hardware software portfolio is offering in this fully featured NAS. But I just think for such a small price difference and being able to excel and expand your NAS in twice as many ways with twice as much bandwidth, it makes the 64 a no-brainer for me. Thank you so much for watching. If you have enjoyed this video, do let me know in the comments. Click like if you've enjoyed the video, because it genuinely helps me understand what I'm doing right and what I'm doing wrong. If you want to learn more about not only QNAP NASs, but how these are going to be comparing with other releases from other brands, then you need to subscribe to NAS Compares. It's literally in the title. And take advantage of the free advice section over on NAS Compares. It is genuinely free, man, by 2 humans, me and Eddie the web guy. We haven't got any bots or anything. And if we can give you a helping hand in helping you decide not only the best solution for your needs, or whether you need a NAS at all. There's a donate button there, use it, ignore it. We don't do anything with your email, couldn't give a stuff about your email. And ultimately, it's there to help you for free. It might take us an extra day or so to reply, because it can get incredibly busy down there, but we do answer every single one. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.